For 20 years on television, Red Skelton made millions of people laugh. The team that worked with him recognized a different man, but he played the foolhardy drunk, the cheerful clown, and the innocent child. They dubbed it the Dirty Hour at Red Skelton. It would have ruined his career what transpired during those private rehearsals. Lawyers found a provision in his will that might have wiped out his whole fortune after his death. America's beloved clown had a darker side to him than anyone had thought. Red Skelton had a lot of baggage when he was born. He was born in Vincennes, Indiana, on July 18, 1913, 2 months after his father passed away. Prior to becoming a grocer, his father, Joseph Ahart, was a circus clown. But not luck was on your side. He perished in the very world he had attempted to escape, a circus tent collapse. It was that one catastrophe that broke Red's family. They had no future in sight, no money, and no support. Ida May, his mother, was left to raise 4 children by herself in a home filled with despair and despair. They were brutally poor. People in the neighborhood gave detailed descriptions of it rather than only whispering about it. Ida May was so impoverished that she took whatever work she could find. Even when it broke her, she continued to work, running elevators and cleaning floors. In addition to being impoverished, Red's family was viewed as hopeless. The town's parents warned their girls not to associate with Red since they believed he was going nowhere. He was pushed rather than broken by the comments and looks that stayed with him. Started as a newsboy when he was only 7 years old. He was shouting headlines on the streets of Vincennes because his family needed the money, not because he enjoyed it. Every coin was useful. He read people's faces, observed them, and discovered how to make them smile. He learned more at work than at school. He learned how to perform, not just sell papers. He discovered that people paid attention to laughter. He would always remember that lesson. At age 10, then, an incredible event occurred. A well-known comedian named Ed Wynn noticed him peddling newspapers outside the Pantheon Theater. After purchasing all of Red's papers, Wynn let him inside. He gave him more than just some cash. He created a whole new planet. Wynn taught Red what backstage life was like in show business. It was thrilling, bright, and quick. A door suddenly opened for a poor boy who had no father and no future. Red got the dream from that one moment. He chased after it. Red left school as soon as he met Wynn. He entered show business with no ease. At the age of 10, he went right in and joined Doc Lewis's patent medicine show. The performances were not glitzy. They were like a touring circus with a sales pitch. Traveled around Missouri, Illinois, Indiana, and Arkansas, making people laugh while assisting with the sale of phony treatments. Despite being a child, he didn't behave like one. Night after night, he labored like an adult, understanding what it meant to be a performer. At one point, his mother claimed that Red didn't flee the house. He was caught up in his fate. Red entered the touring theater industry by the time he was 14 years old. He was cast in tense, somber plays after joining the John Lawrence Stock Company. It felt like a fortune that he was earning $15 a week, but something wasn't right. Red made a concerted effort to be serious, but the crowd always laughed when he said something dramatic. His purpose was to bring them to tears. Rather, they thought he was humorous. He was fired by the corporation once they also noticed it. They abandoned him, unpaid and alone, in a budget hotel by the Missouri River. Though it wasn't, that might have been the end. Red persevered. He discovered a sternwheel showboat called the Cotton Blossom a few days later. It continued to cling to the bygone era of river entertainment as it drifted downstream. Red lobbied his way in. He did everything in that boat. Like other performers of the day, they used blackface, danced, sang, and joked. Every night presented a fresh obstacle. It was necessary to win over every crowd. Never letting a silent audience remain silent for long taught him to work hard and shift quickly. His life was saved by that boat. And it taught him better than any school could. Red was 15 and no longer a novice. He performed vaudeville professionally. He has performed in the circus, medical shows, showboats, burlesque circuits, and blackface minstrel shows. Taking after his father, he became a clown. He went farther, though. He hosted dancing marathons during the Great Depression on some nights, where couples danced until they passed out in order to raise money. He never remained motionless. He went to all lengths to continue working and moving. Red was learning in front of the public, on stages, and in tents, whereas the majority of children his age were learning in classrooms. It was Kansas City that gave him something new in 1930. It brought Edna Stillwell to him. She was but 16. Working at the Pantages Theater as an usher. Edna had entered since Red was throwing a dance marathon. She won. She did more than simply dance. She then informed Red that his jokes were inadequate. His attention was drawn to that honesty. They were wed a year later. Edna grew beyond his spouse. She was his writer, his manager, and his guardian. She earned him more money. She assisted him in pursuing a diploma. She was the author of his jokes. She continued to write for him 13 years after their divorce. She was the only one who understood his beat. It was a small diner that led to their greatest discovery. They observed individuals in Montreal dipping donuts into coffee. That strange little behavior gave rise to an idea. They made the Donut Dunkers skit, a pantomime performance in which Red demonstrated several donut dipping techniques. That was absurd. It was also quite good. It was adored by audiences. They were scheduled for the Lowe's State Theater in New York in 1937. They were in the major leagues at last. Red was introduced to radio, film, and even the White House by that one sketch. He accepted President Roosevelt's invitation to perform. Red soon took over as the host of Roosevelt's birthday celebrations. 1937 marked a significant turning point in Red Skelton's ascent in show business. After years of traveling vaudeville circuits, his life was completely turned upside down by a single radio appearance in August. Rudy Valley, and he did his Donut Dunkers routine on the Fleischmann's Yeast Hour. Despite being straightforward pantomime, it captivated the public. There was an incredible response. The fan letters came flooding in. He received 2 more invitations to return that year. Was suddenly more than just a theatrical actor. A radio star, he was. In October 1938, NBC officially announced it. He took Red Foley's place as the new host of Avalon Time. Much of the material was molded behind the scenes by his wife, Edna. She wasn't merely a servant. She was his primary creative collaborator and writer. Their collaboration made Red stand out. Surprisingly, his characters, voice acting, and physical humor translated well to radio. It was more than merely the next move. Red found himself in the center of a world that was a jump into a new one. Red was prepared for something greater by 1941. When the Raleigh cigarette program began on October 7, it quickly gained national popularity. During this time, Red presented several of his most well-known characters. The cruel, thin child, Junior, became a national celebrity. His words, "I doed it," became widely used. It appeared in battle headlines in newspapers. The Doolittle raid was followed by the phrase "Doolittle doed it." Children adored the figure so much that they contributed to the purchase of We Did It, a bomber jet. Another invention, Clem Cattlehopper, was inspired by an actual Indiana neighbor. In addition to comic Wonderful Smith, Ozzie and Harriet Nelson also joined the evening. Their presence gave the play more nuance and influenced its humor. Red's enlistment in the Army in June 1944 put an end to the run. However, at that time, he had already made a lasting impression on American society. Red's big screen debut came earlier, in 1938. In Having Wonderful Time, he made his screen debut. In a light comedy, a summer camp is the setting. He appeared on the same screen as Douglas Fairbanks Jr. and Ginger Rogers. He portrayed Itchy Faulkner, the disorderly social director of the camp. Even in a smaller role, Red left an effect, yet the most of his scenes were removed. It was enough for critics to notice his timing and drive. The film made a profit over its $966,000 budget, with a gross of over $1 million. It opened doors even though it wasn't a blockbuster. Additionally, Hollywood was taking notice of his trademark performances, such as the donut dunking part. Red thereafter established himself as a mainstay at MGM. He made more than 30 film appearances between 1938 and 1951. He was paired with Burt Lahr and Eleanor Powell in 1941 by Chippehoy. The 1944 film Bathing Beauty, which was initially composed for Red but is most known for launching Esther Williams to fame, followed. In the 1948 film The Fuller Brushman, he portrayed a door-to-door salesman who became entangled in a murderous scheme. With its vivid Technicolor images and intricate swimming sequences choreographed by Busby Berkeley, Bathing Beauty was particularly legendary. Audiences adored Red's characters because they successfully combined humor and emotion. His manner was unique and cozy, naive and affectionate. As a result, he remained one of MGM's most dependable comic actors throughout the 1940s. Featured in Whistling in the Dark, which was released the same year the Raleigh cigarette program started. It was a significant year. In 1941, he was chosen as the most popular new radio star. It was no easy task. He faced legendary figures like Fred Allen and Jack Benny. What was unique about Red was his clean humor. For every age group, it was effective. Just humorous, odd characters that you and your parents may laugh at, without any political or filthy comments. He was unique because of this. It was the reason he stayed. March 1944 brought forth yet another shift. Red enlisted in the Army. His radio career was at its peak at the time. Every Tuesday night at 10:30 p.m., the Raleigh cigarette program was broadcast. It was among the nation's top-rated programs. His sponsors were reluctant to let him go. And MGM didn't. They made an effort to defer him. It failed. He aired his last episode on June 6, 1944. The following day, he was promoted to Private Skelton. He lost his time slot to Ozzie and Harriet's escapades. Suddenly, one of America's most beloved voices was no longer heard. Nothing was an exception to the war. Red received no preferential treatment. Like any other soldier, he trained. However, there was a catch. He was invited to perform all the time. He performed in many comedic shows, often 12 in a day, in between drills. It quickly depleted him. During one of the performances, he wrote in his diary that he felt faint. He misplaced some of his act. The symptoms were there, even though he concealed it. His transfer to Italy took place in April 1945. In 6 days, he performed 41 gigs in that month alone. The soldiers adored him. He raised morale, according to chaplains, but Red was exhausted. Both his body and his thoughts were failing him. And then it collapsed. It was in Naples when he broke down. They took him to a military hospital after rushing him home. There, he spent 3 months. The public was never truly informed of what transpired. The newspapers gently touched it. It was shook inside, though. He began to stammer. He was no longer a man who effortlessly switched between characters. He saw a fellow soldier who refused to speak one day when he was in the hospital. Red tried to get him to chuckle. That brief encounter aided in his recovery. The scars, however, remained. He was formally released in September 1945. Later, he joked that he was the only famous person to enter and exit a private session. It was more than a joke, though. Red chose not to take the simple route. His request was not for a Hollywood unit or a desk job. He changed because he chose the difficult path. The collapse has long-term consequences. Stuttering persisted. And so did the agony. On September 24, he signed his discharge documents. Even though the war chapter was ended, he had a permanent change in himself. Red didn't waste time, though. 10 weeks after leaving the Army, on December 4, 1945, he was back on the air. The resumption of the Raleigh cigarette program excited the fans. However, those closest to him were aware of the change. Even though Red was still witty and incisive, there was now a darker undertone. Offstage, he laughed less. He pulled away more frequently. His new personalities were more nuanced. Someone who had experienced something was reflected in them. Not only did Red Skelton Show fill another time slot when it debuted on NBC on September 30, 1951, but it also took over television screens. Red was already a radio and movie sensation, and millions of people were excited to watch him on television. The coaxial cable, a new technology that let people all over the United States to watch the program simultaneously, allowed the nation to watch live as his well-known comedy took on a new life. Red's monologue ended in the first episode when two invisible hands dragged him off the platform. He had to drop it later, even though it was a funny part that actually hurt people. However, the episode had a huge influence. At the conclusion of its debut season, the program was ranked number 4 in every network. Won Best Comedian and Best Comedy at the 1952 Emmy Awards, defeating the perennially dominant Milton Berle. Something significant was beginning. American laughter would be shaped by Red Skelton for the next 2 decades. Red transferred his show to CBS in 1954. It was a wise decision. CBS granted him more flexibility and airtime. Families all around the nation began to regularly watch the show on Tuesday nights by 1962, when it had grown to an hour long. It spent over 20 years in the top 20. In the middle of the 1960s, it even peaked at number 2 in the country's ratings. In addition to being a comedic pioneer, Red also pioneered technological advancements. Despite CBS's reluctance to make the move, he financed for color broadcasts alone from 1955 until 1960. Although the show was popular, CBS canceled it in 1970. It was still strong, but it was because they wanted younger viewers, not because of the ratings. Red's listeners were older. That wasn't part of the network's new strategy. Both industry insiders and fans were taken aback by the cancellation. Even legends can be washed aside, as this icy warning made clear. The TV run began with one of Red's favorite characters. He presented Freddy the Freeloader in 1952. Living in a shanty, Freddy was a silent clown who never stopped grinning despite having very little. He was inspired by Red's recollections of his father, who, prior to his passing, worked as a circus clown. Red gave Freddy his entire being. It was a part of his identity, not merely a role. Freddy was never a winner. Despite the grim outlook, he had faith that something positive was on the horizon. Of all his creatures, Red once claimed that Freddy was the purest. Freddy's silent sketches, known as the silent spot, were a mainstay of the program. Red told complete stories without a word by using his hands, his face, and his gestures. Long after Red's main show ended, in 1981, Freddy received his own HBO special. It demonstrated that individuals still had strong feelings for the figure. Red brought viewers more than just giggles through Freddy. He gave them hope. Behind the scenes, however, Red's life took a terrible turn. 10 days before turning 10, his son Richard passed away from leukemia on May 10, 1958. It destroyed the Skelton household. Richard was so ill he didn't even realize it. Georgia and Red tried to shield him from the truth, but the constant infusions were too much for his frail body. In his last hours, Richard, who was covered in bruises and had an 4 in his leg, asked his father for one last favor. "Daddy, will you get that red blanket for Mama on Mother's Day?" he said. It was not for him. It was for his mom. Before going into a coma, he said some of those final words. He passed away at 8:36 p.m. For more than an hour, Red in Georgia remained by his side in the hospital room, surrounded by his toys and the stuffed animal he had cherished since he was 6 years old. Later, Georgia said she had waited until then to cry. She had visited Richard, who had implored her not to cry. She eventually let it out that night. Red brought to the hospital a Sears catalog on Richard's last full day. Richard was instructed to choose anything he desired for his birthday. That crimson blanket, a tent, and camping equipment were the boy's choices. It wasn't for him, though. It was for his mom. He added that he preferred a picnic with a select group of pals over a large celebration. Even when he was dying, he considered other people. That red blanket came to represent his affection. Georgia carried it with her for the remainder of her life. Richard's identity and the significance he held for his parents were fully exposed in that moment. Red could not stand to go near Richard's room after his death. He left it just as he had. Toys remained. The bag remained packed. He would frequently sit there by himself and quietly sink into a deep sadness. Not all of the pain remained secret. His marriage and his career began to reflect it. Georgia and Red became estranged. For the sake of Richard, they had kept each other together. The sadness caused a rift between them when he left. Their union eventually came to an end. Red started to change his humor. Even still, it was difficult to ignore the grief in his eyes as he performed. It turned to become a shrine. All the memories he was unable to discuss were contained within. The clown was able to shed tears there. The fact that Red was a serious painter was unknown to most fans. When he was 5 years old, he began accompanying his mother on her travels with the circus. His father was a clown who passed away before Red was born, thus the circus became his world. Clowns painted in red, some happy, some lonely. These were not arbitrary items. They were related to Freddy and other characters he had portrayed. He was selling his paintings for more than $80,000 apiece by the 1980s. Millions were made each year from his lithographs. According to some art experts, his earnings from painting were more than those from television. His creations are now in private collections all around the world. Almost no one anticipated this second career. However, it was always present, just below the surface. Red had another secret. He was well known for portraying drunks on stage, despite never having a drink. He got his start in television with his Guzzler's Gin sketch. People thought he had personal experience with booze. He did not. He actually had an allergy to it. Despite his inability to drink it, he continued to hone the performance. His early days in vaudeville were spent observing actual drunks on the streets. He remarkably accurately mimicked their halting movements, slurred utterances, and unpredictably paced walks. It wasn't real, it was all a performance. His performance deceived millions of people, demonstrating the depth of his talent. Backstage, the man didn't always fit that picture of the good-natured clown. Red would frequently use foul language and ferocious sarcasm when rehearsing with Martha Ray and other pals. The staff began to revere these intimate meetings. The Red Skelton Dirty Hour was the moniker given to it. Discussed every subject, including ones he would never discuss on air. Lothian, his third wife, allegedly claimed that Red had a special place in his heart for jokes that were meant to be incomprehensible to others. It was comparable to a pressure valve. One version of himself was presented to the world, but he also needed to chuckle privately. Red Skelton illuminated American television for almost 20 years, despite the fact that it was darker. His show spent the majority of those years in the top 10. In its last season on CBS, it ranked 7th. However, in 1970, none of that was relevant. The Red Skelton Show was canceled by CBS nevertheless. Ratings have nothing to do with it. The focus was not on performance. It has to do with image. Anything deemed too ancient or too rural was closed by the network. This action was dubbed the rural purge. CBS President Fred Silverman did not bat an eyelid when they fired not just Skelton but also the Beverly Hillbillies, Green Acres, and Mayberry RFD in a single sweep. Younger, metropolitan audiences were what he desired. Ratings weren't important. Not that the legacy mattered. The audience's devotion was in vain. This harsh change in television history saw edgier programs like Moss H and All in the Family replace beloved family favorites. Loyal fans numbered in the millions. They included Red Skelton. He was crushed, not only let down. At the time of the news, he was performing in Las Vegas. "It has broken my heart," he remarked. Over his 20 years on TV, his show had been in the top 10 for 17 of those years. CBS didn't care, though. Instead of examining decades of service, they examined data from a demographic sheet. Red, according to his wife Lothian, never really recovered from the treachery. An industry he helped create threw him aside. Despite the cancellation, he continued to perform. The anguish of being cast aside persisted even after he performed live up to 70 times a year. "I am angry that they failed to recognize that I still had something to offer," he said to Lothian. In 1970, NBC attempted to bring him back for a final season, but they made a complete shift. It was shortened from an hour to 30 minutes. It was shifted from Tuesday evenings to Mondays. The set grew gloomy and chilly. They broke up the flow by bringing in a group of young actors. Spectators sensed the change. It seemed strained now, what had felt natural. The ratings went down. It didn't even make it into the top 30. NBC canceled the program by the spring of 1971. The days of Red Skelton on weekly TV were over. The show wasn't the only thing that failed. It was the connection he had made with the audience that was irreplaceable. Red maintained his position while the comedy industry evolved. He refused to succumb to profanity. He declined to make his act more shocking or profane. "My audience's moms, fathers, kids, and grandchildren will not hear me restate what they can read on restroom walls," he declared. While other comics made adaptations, Red remained true to clean humor. He didn't care that it made him appear outdated. His audience was deserving of respect. He continued to take the stage. He performed at charity events, bars, and colleges. He was still liked, joked at, and attended by people. He demonstrated the continued viability of wholesome comedy. He was never one to adapt to the times. He defended his convictions. Then, nobody anticipated the shock. 13 of his previous authors sued him in 1980. They discovered that Red had included a clause in his will. It stated that after he passed away, all of the Red Skelton show's cassettes should be destroyed. That would result in no syndication, no reruns, and no residuals for the authors if it were implemented. Dozens of years of labor would be lost. Red claimed that he wrote it during a difficult period when he felt abandoned by the industry, but he changed his mind after reading the criticism. "Would you burn the only monument you've built in more than 20 years?" he questioned afterwards. In the end, he permitted the preservation of certain episodes. Although his change of heart preserved his legacy and the writer's work, the episode made clear the extent of the anguish he still suffered. The personal life of Red Skelton was equally replete with heartbreak. His ex-wife, Georgia Davis, committed suicide on May 10, 1976. She was armed. She carried it out in the backyard of her Rancho Mirage, California, residence. There was a reason for the date. It was the anniversary of Richard, their son, passing away. At the age of 10, Richard had passed away from leukemia in 1958. Georgia was never able to move on. Depression and alcoholism were her battles. Their union was a failure. 1971 saw their divorce. She had suffered a .38 gunshot wound to the chest in Las Vegas 10 years prior, in 1966. Even that was shrouded in mystery. She ceased performing for over 10 years after her death. He pulled away from the limelight. He was overcome with sadness. Red got married again in 1973. The renowned cinematographer Greg Toland's daughter was Lothian Toland, his new bride. Red was 60. She was 36. They relocated to Anzac, California, to live on a peaceful ranch. In addition to caring for bonsai plants, they reared horses. They kept away from Hollywood. The noise was averted. It was Lothian who brought him calm. Red's letters were written daily. She saved them, only discovering a few after his death. Although she avoided the spotlight, she assumed responsibility for keeping his memory alive. She ensured that people would remember Red's efforts. Red never stopped entertaining, even without television. Every year, he gave about 70 performances. Casinos, college auditoriums, and Carnegie Hall. He went where there was laughter. And he began to paint. Clowns were his area of interest. They were treasured by collectors. more than $80,000 was paid for some paintings. From his art, he made up to $2.5 million annually. The anguish, however, persisted behind the scenes. The sorrow never subsided. He put his all into his work. He earned every grin he offered the audience by going through personal pain. Red Skelton perished on September 17, 1997. 84 years old. It was pneumonia. At Rancho Mirage's Eisenhower Medical Center, he passed away. He lived a peaceful yet active last several years. Despite painting, performing, and working, he never really recovered from the loss of Georgia or his son. Friends claimed that he never fully recovered his joy. Despite their outward brightness, his clown paintings concealed a deeper message. They were pictures of a man who thrived to make people laugh while grieving in solitude. In 2013, the Red Skelton Museum of American Comedy opened in Vincennes, Indiana, Red's hometown. On July 18, he would have turned 100 years old. The location is on the Vincennes University campus. It's not just a museum, though. It has his screenplays, costumes, rare video, more than 200 paintings, and even personal belongings that Lothian contributed. The Laughter Film Festival and America's Clown Award are among the other events held at the museum. Currently, the Indiana Historical Society is the owner of the Red Skelton Research Archive. Thousands of writings, photos, and musical scores are among them. It all comes together to preserve Red's memory. People still remember Red's characters: the Mean Whittle Kid, Freddy the Freeloader, and Clem Kettledhopper. These were more than jokes. They had compassion. They lived. American culture adopted his figures. Comedy was influenced by his approach, and Jim Carrey, Robin Williams, and others looked up to him for guidance. 20 years were spent with The Red Skelton Show. It received several Emmys. It became commonplace in households all throughout the nation. His contributions are still heard in entertainment today. He's still laughing. His influence endures.